I'm Jonathan Halstuch. I'm the CTO and co-founder of RackTop Systems, and we're going to talk about software-defined cyber storage and zero trust today. And I appreciate your time and attendance.
Just for a beginner kind of level, what does zero trust mean in this environment?
So basically, zero trust is moving away from that static kind of permission or trust model where if I give you permission to a folder, once I give you read-write access to that folder, you continue to have access to read-write data to that folder until I remove it. Whereas zero trust is evaluating each operation to that folder. So I might give you read-write access to that folder, but I'm evaluating each file operation as you read and write data to that system. And based on that evaluation for trust, I'm determining, am I going to let that file operation happen? Maybe you've written a ton of data or you're reading a bunch of data and it looks like data theft, and I'm going to stop it. Or maybe I'm just going to alert on it. And so a little bit about RackTop. We've been around a while. We were founded in 2010. We have backgrounds within the DoD and national security space, and we're headquartered in the DC metro area. We have people across the US with our support is 100% US based, and we provide support to customers around the globe as well. So RackTop's the company. The product is the BrickStor SP, which is short for the BrickStor security platform. And it's a cyber storage solution to protect unstructured data. And it's the only end-to-end cyber storage solution available today. And essentially,
Jonathan, when you say end-to-end?
End-to-end, what I mean is what people would try to do is take all the features that make cyber storage, like that active defense, the protection with things like snapshots, replication, all the features of cyber storage, and make it happen by taking traditional NAS and bolting on compliance software, security software, other tools to try to do it. And when you do that, you end up getting into other problems, which I'm going to talk about like you need to use privileged accounts that expose that data, which make it easy for an APT or an advanced persistent threat to steal the data. It also affects, what it's important to a lot of people in the storage industry, performance. Basically, you're using IOPS and throughputs to do compliance and security scans. The way we've architected it end to end, we can eliminate those bottlenecks and eliminate the need for those privileged accounts. And so built into the product out of the box, you're getting active defense to actually protect your unstructured data against things like ransomware or an even harder threat to detect, the insider threat. And really, it's that move from recovery to an active defense to actually stop the attack in real time. That's the goal, right? If you think about where people thought about backups traditionally, it was to protect against things like a natural disaster. You can't stop a hurricane. You can't stop a fire. That happens, and you need to have DR and continuity of operations and things like that. But an attack, a cyber attack, you can actually detect and stop. You want to stop that as early as possible. And there's a statistic that says most attackers or adversaries are on your network for 200 days before they launch something like a ransomware attack. So what you want to do is detect them in that 200 days where you can stop them from stealing the data. And that's what we're focused on with the BrickStor security platform. And because we're doing all these things, we have built-in compliance, right? Because compliance is the demonstration of those security controls that you're continuously implementing security controls, like all the ones in the risk management framework or things for HIPAA, right? We give you the reports built into the user interface to demonstrate that those controls are in place and how they're being used continuously for things to make it easy to go through an audit for whatever regulation you have or internal policy.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So you protect, the data in your system, but actually I need backup like anybody else. So do you have any mechanism or integration or something that, keeps the data protected even when I move it out with a backup operation, for example?
So we're protecting the data that's on us or goes through us in the data plane, and we can facilitate things like backup. So in certain cases, we're working with the primary backup vendors to be the backup target. So people will write that backup data to us, and we can protect that. We can protect it with immutable snapshots, and we can even replicate it to a second location, a second instance of BrickStor. Or with our transparent data movement technology, we can actually tier it to an object store, which could be on-prem or in the cloud, as long as it's S3 compliant.
But you don't have a specific integration to say, keep data encrypted when it leaves the system.
Once it leaves the system, then it's kind of out of the way we can control it. But with the TDM method, if you tier the data to the object store, you still access the data through us to get to the object store, and so we can still protect that. But once it's off the system, then you would need some other technology like a DLP or something to protect it. Yep.
Question, you've put it on a couple of slides now, which means, so built by NSA engineers, I presume you mean this is a good thing.
Yep.
As a private citizen who happens to live in a Five Eyes country, could you explain why that's a good thing?
Sure. So I think that to understand how adversaries and nation states act to basically get data on an offensive operation, how they defend data, you need to have that knowledge to understand how they behave and to understand that it's not just an over-the-wire type of attack. People will employ many methods to get access to your data. It could be using a person, right? They might bribe somebody, and we've seen this with ransomware, to put malware on the network and infect it. So having that experience working in that type of industry in the past, we know all of the different techniques that are typically used and have thought about that and have baked those ideas and thoughts into the product. So out of the box, you don't have to have that experience, but you can get those levels of protection. But it doesn't mean we're spying on you or feeding that data up to anything.
Well, it also says built by NSA engineers. None of the NSA engineers are going to be able to admit they built it.
Right, and it's former. Nobody built it as an NSA. It's like for people with that experience. But yep, good point. and I'm going to talk about the software-defined NAS model and the flexibility you get in that some later slides. But I want to talk a little bit more on CISA and their zero trust maturity model, right? So we talked a little bit about what zero trust is and what it means in this context. And we're starting to see zero trust be pushed on all organizations through things like NIST, where they're creating standards, as well as regulations, because now those standards are getting adopted into things like the risk management framework and CISA's zero trust maturity model. And I think it's key to realize that the fifth pillar of that maturity model is data, right? A lot of people have made investments in the other pillars, but they haven't done anything to invest in that maturity model for data. But out of the box, if you deploy BrickStor, and this is where that end-to-end comes from, you can meet up to level 5 maturity, which is the highest level of that zero trust pillar for data. And you're going to get all that visibility into who's accessing what files in real time. It's not any sort of delay to the time you get those insights. And you can provide that real-time orchestration and real-time governance. So you can stop the attack before it's too late. And so I have this kind of animation that kind of shows, this is the NIST zero trust architecture that they show. And you can see that we're not only detecting issues, but we're enforcing that zero trust policy. So we're looking as a user tries to access a file or performs operations or even applications, right? They read data, they write data, they modify data. We're looking at what IP they're coming from, what size of the file operation, what's the other stuff they've done in the recent term. And based on that and everything else in the infrastructure, we can either allow that operation to happen, we can allow an alert on it, or we can actually block that user's IP and their account from accessing further data. And we can even respond to other things within the infrastructure. So if you already have things like a security orchestration that you see bad behavior in other parts of the network and you want to lock down the storage, we can respond through the API to that as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that in an upcoming slide. And so, from a storage perspective, the key features of the BrickStor SP is we're a high performance NAS, but we provide the latest and greatest file protocols for both SMB. We have up to 3.1.1, and we can even support back to SMB1. We still see in some of these embedded systems that can't be upgraded, they have SMB1. We'll alert you to the fact that you're using SMB1 and that it's insecure and risky, but at least you can pay attention and understand that's happening in your environment and see if there's something to do or needs to be done. And then we support common NFS protocols, NFS 3, 4, 4.1, and 4.2. And we can also support encryption and signing from the client to BrickStor. So the data in flight is encrypted. And then once it gets to us, we can do space efficient things like inline compression and inline deduplication. And then we can actually encrypt it at a per data set level, or we can also encrypt the entire, if we're using like self-encrypting drives in cases where we're using direct attached storage, we can manage the keys for that and put those drives into FIPS mode as well. And, we're doing all those required kind of storage things like immutable snapshots. So we have data protection policies in our system.
You said you're encrypt at the data set level?
Yeah, so
think a different key per data set is possible.
It is possible, yep. And we can be the key manager, or we can integrate.
We're talking a file system, so it could be billions of data sets there, right?
Right. So it's scalable. It's a 128-bit file system, and we can either manage the keys, or we can talk to an enterprise key manager by KMIP, which is an open standard.
Okay.
And so we have data protection policies that automatically associate with the storage profile you provision. And so basically you provision storage, you say, hey, I want to create a data set for general file share or streaming media. In the background, we'll optimize for that type of workload. And we'll also associate the data protection policy, the organization set, how frequently we're taking snapshots, how long we're retaining those snapshots, and then if we're replicating those snapshots as well. And so as we talked about earlier, you can actually replicate the snapshots in a system from one to many systems. And I have another slide on replication, which I'll talk a little more detail. We can also, with our transparent data movement technology, tier data to a less secure, potentially, set of NFS shares or S3 object stores. And we will compress and encrypt that data before we tier it to that NFS storage or that S3 object store. And to access that data, you go through the BrickStor again. Users can still access their data through the normal SMB and NFS protocols, but the data stays protected because we've compressed and encrypted before we ship it. It leaves the box. And so everything we're doing on the system is audited, both what sysadmins do to configure the system.
So encryption, CFAR regulations, I mean, you can't ship it to certain companies or countries or something like that. Is there separate levels of encryption for, let's say, European versus American?
So we only ship to, so for FIPS encryption, there's rules on what a FIPS validated module can be sent to. If it's, most places now can support AES 256, except kind of the banned countries. And so you just basically have to follow paperwork and export controls, but it's not challenging to do. And we can do that. Yep. And traditionally what we're providing is FIPS AES 256 encryption.
Will you have some slides to talk about performance? Because you are adding a lot of features on top of traditional storage. And, this is very CPU intensive, or,
So I don't have a slide, but I'm happy to address that now. So it's a software-defined architecture, and we get to take advantage of the new instruction sets and the like Intel scalable architectures and their improvements. So every time Intel makes improvements, they have more cores, they have advanced vector instruction sets. We take advantage of those things, and even for like encryption, we take advantage of the AES-NI encryption acceleration. It does take overhead, but we are able to scale the system appropriately to meet the workloads. And I'll talk about that in the use cases, but you might have stuff that doesn't require extreme performance. So you might be fine with a hybrid architecture. You might have something that does require extreme performance. We just need to architect it with the right hardware and backend storage, and we can deliver that. But the way we're doing it, because of using RAM as our primary caching architecture, we're able to do a lot as you're reading and writing to the system and take advantage of the Intel processors to do that.
Can you take advantage of any accelerator that now is available in in the storage space? DPUs.
We're definitely looking at that stuff. Currently, we don't officially support any of that, but it would be feasible given that you could plug something like a DPU in. It's going to look like an NVMe drive, and we'd be able to write to that. And that's the beauty of the architecture, is like as that underlying storage and IT infrastructure improves, we keep improving too. So that'd be totally reasonable to do.
Very good. And sorry, and the deployment model, so can you provide a virtual appliance as well as a physical appliance?
We can, yep, we do both. And I have the three models we have in this slide that'll help illustrate it too, coming up right next. So, but yeah, we support physical and virtual. You can even deploy in the cloud with the virtual instance too. We can support the major cloud providers.
Is that what you meant by hybrid environments?
I'm not sure. I might have meant hybrid environments that we do support the cloud, but definitely, yes, we support that. And we also support hybrid storage with like basically the combination of RAM, a little bit of flash, and spinning drive. Yep. Yep. And so we're auditing with the system activity, but we're also auditing user behavior activity. I'm going to get into that. But combined with all this auditing, we're able to, in real time, do things like active defense and protect the data against ransomware and insider threat. And I'm going to have more slides on that.
Yeah, and I also read that you're dealing with fake news and political ads into your system there. Is that true, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know. Not that I know of. So,
okay.
Yeah. And so, one thing with security is, and I think we all know this as IT practitioners, is human error tends to lead to a lot of mistakes, which leads to vulnerabilities, and that's a challenge. So we want to make it simple. We want to make it so that an IT generalist can use it. And we've designed it to be secure by default and eliminate a lot of manual tasks. Technology's evolved a lot. I talked about having storage profiles. We can optimize things like block size, caching, all those back-end settings and put those into a storage profile so that a user doesn't have to go look at like, oh, what are the best practices when I'm doing this type of thing? We can just make that very easy so anybody can use it, especially as you start to see IT teams become less siloed and specialized and you have more generalists. So, and we make it easy to provision it, as I mentioned, by workload. And also if we see things in the UI that are, out of compliance that are set up on the system, it'll notify you that, hey, this doesn't match the standard way it's set up. Do you want to revert it back? And it'll give you a one-click option to revert that back to the normal standard way of configuring it.
Do you also provide a sort of multi-tenancy, or I mean, just to segregate some data on a specific area of the system and give access only to specific people, or even
Yes.
specific policies that are different from others?
Yes, we can segment and segregate it. We have things like context security labels as well, so you can provide additional security around things like that so that only users coming from a system approved for that would be able to access that. We can do host-based access controls in addition to identity-based access controls so that, we can integrate with Active Directory as well as LDAP and things like that too.
So you have a mechanism to map, what's available from Active Directory, for example, to an internal system where
Yep.
you manage all these maps.
Yep. And we manage users and groups all through that as well. Yep, we do. And so one of the things that a lot of customers really get excited about when they start to see the demo is the user behavior analytics. This can give you unprecedented visibility into what's happening within the infrastructure and who's accessing data. So there's a security aspect to this, but there's also a very valuable data management aspect to this, right? One thing is lots of people will have all this data. They've moved and migrated, from storage system to storage system. And it's like, it's kind of like when you move houses and you don't unpack the box, you just keep dragging them with you. You have all this data around and you don't even know who the community of interest is that uses that data. With this, you could go to a data set and say, has anybody accessed this data in the last 90 days? Or who are the people that use this data, and have a conversation with them? Maybe it's about moving them to a different tier of storage. Maybe it's archiving the data, or maybe it's a widely exposed data set and you want to reduce who has access only to those people that really are accessing the data and need it for risk purposes. And you can use the user interface to filter by, you want to just see what a particular user was doing. Maybe you're suspicious about their activities, or you're looking for a particular file and you want to see who moved the file. Maybe somebody did a drag and drop where they dropped the whole folder into another one and nobody can find it. You could just basically search for that folder name and see what happened and attribute who did it. Not only that, but all of this data is available in a standard syslog format. So we can feed this into your existing log servers or SIM so that this data can be made available to them. And essentially it becomes another security sensor within your infrastructure, because there's times where, users are accessing data, or what an advanced persistent threat we try to do is sidestep the systems that have endpoint agents on it and get to a system that's not agented, and then try to access the data from there. With this, there's no way you can get to the data without coming through us. Everything you're doing is going to be audited.
Jonathan, there's
Yep.
some words on this slide. Automated response to stop threats before it's too late.
Yep.
Want to talk about that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, people are often kind of looking around. The adversary gets on the network and then they start snooping around to see what's there. You look at the SolarWinds Sunburst attack. They got into the network through the supply chain, right? They got into the network monitoring software. Now that they're in the network monitoring software, they elevated their privileges to an admin credential so they could look around. It's not unusual for the network monitoring system to touch all those boxes because it's monitoring. But you don't really know what it's doing. You just see that it's the fact of it's communicating. With us, we would have immediately alerted the fact that the network monitoring software used an admin account to start looking and reading at file shares. So we would have immediately put an alert and an incident up that would have notified the security team that an admin account that's the network monitoring system.
Alerts are okay. Automation is interesting.
Okay, so the automation, there's basically a rules engine with our assessors where once it gets to a certain threat level and builds certain confidence, you can say, I want to block this activity. So in the case of like ransomware, we will actually see, hey, this is like a ransomware behavior where it's reading a file and encrypting it, and it's doing this consistently. We will block that user's IP, we'll block their user account from accessing data, and we'll also put a hold on snapshots. So we'll actually we have these rolling snapshots where we're taking snapshots every minute for the past 5 minutes, no matter what. And when we detect an incident, we put a hold on those snapshots so they don't go away. And then you're going to see that we can actually show you, hey, these were the files that we saw affected in the incident. Do you want to recover them back to the version before they got encrypted by the ransomware, et cetera? And so that's all part of our active defense capability, right? So auditing is interesting. A lot of people have been doing auditing in various ways for a while, but the real differentiation is that active defense capability, taking that, all that audit information, taking that high fidelity audit information, right? Because it's not just, oh, they opened this file or they read that file. We can see, did they read the whole file, a portion of the file? And once they write it, we know a lot more about the, the structure of the file too. So because the data lives on us, we have a lot more visibility than just a tool that goes in afterwards and looks at the permissions or who accessed the file. So we are a high fidelity sensor that gives us the ability to actively defend that data and then send out alerts to the existing security team. So it's not like it's a whole new product and a new infrastructure change in behavior. You're basically able to drop this in and replace existing file shares or existing NAS solutions and integrate it with your existing environment. It doesn't require a change in behavior.
How long does it normally take for this to, quote, learn your environment before you're comfortable with it responding to things?
Yeah, so certain things like the ransomware stuff, it doesn't really have to learn. That's like out of the box. But some of the excessive file access, that's stuff you typically, depending on how big the environment, you're looking at about 2 weeks to a month before you have a good understanding of what's going on and understanding that. Yep. And one other thing is, I think the real key thing too is you're providing cyber resiliency by containing the attack, right? We're only blocking the bad user. You're going to see in the demo that the users that aren't doing anything bad continue to operate. So you don't have this instance with Colonial Pipeline where you have to shut everything down and you have no visibility to what's happening. You can basically understand what's happening, what the attacker's trying to do, report on that in real time, and then quickly recover. Obviously, if you're in healthcare, you don't want to shut all the medical imaging down to protect it from ransomware. You need to continue to deliver care and just stop the bad systems.
Do you have any report or something that you can share, with the interested people in the organization to know what is happening, how it is happening, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, and so there's a snapshot of that here where you can kind of see, hey, these are the files, these were what was affected, this is the user, this was the IP, and those are incident reports. Or you have the user behavior audit screen, which you can see all of that visibility into what every user is doing. And in the demo, we're going to show you a ransomware attack and these other things and how you can detect that. So, and all those reports are exportable too. So you can export them, to show them to management or other stakeholders.
Do you have any sort of like pluggable architecture in this where people could come up with their own sets of policies, their own sets of rules, so they could entirely plug into the system?
Yes. So within the active defense area of the GUI, you basically can go into the rules part and you can add rules or change how that responds to different things. And in our kind of roadmap, we have an even kind of more pluggable architecture as part of what we call Hub, where you'll be able to basically have different vendors, different organizations be able to get access to that data and kind of be like a data clearinghouse to do things with that security information and take action.
Okay, well, I was thinking along the lines of you're talking about like medical professions or that type of thing, where you have essentially a plugin that says in the medical profession, this is the type of thing that you typically want to handle. In, if you're an oil company, this would be the type of thing that was kind of the line.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but that actually is making me think about some things. So I'll have to talk more about that. Yeah,
okay.
That's definitely something we could do. A lot of stuff is pretty generically applicable, but I could also see that you could get more specific if you knew, hey, these are the specific data types that I work with in medical. These are the specific data types I work in, like oil gas exploration. And so there's definitely always more we can do, and the threat's always evolving. And so we're constantly evolving the security and protection we're delivering to.
Like in medical, you have medical records. There's only certain people who should be able to access them, whereas
right.
Other types of data, that was kind of the reason I was asking.
Yeah, and some of that we implement now through best practices and just guidance, but there's ways we could start to automate some more of that too.
The system is, if I remember well, is a scale-up system, right?
That's correct.
So do you have a mechanism to manage multiple systems from a single console so that I can apply the same policies,
yes.
having a better view of the
yes.
roads?
Yeah, so right now we have single pane of glass to manage multiple instances. So you can manage an instance on-prem, in the cloud, or wherever it exists, as long as you have logical connectivity. And we're continuing to evolve that with our hub capability, where we're going to have that multi-system management to be able to push down policies even more seamlessly.
Okay, good.
Yep. this just gives you a better view of what I was talking about with transparent data movement. And I think the key point there is that users can still access data the same way they always have over SMB or NFS, but you can take advantage of an object store for better, economy price for that tier of storage. Or you can also use it in the cases of backup where we might be the local backup target to some backup software, you're writing to us, and then we're also creating a duplicate copy that exists, in the cloud, so you have geo redundancy. And as long as you have the encryption keys, you can recreate everything, even if the box on the left was completely destroyed. If you have the decryption keys, all the metadata and the contents are in the object store, so you can recreate everything and even recover to the cloud or recover to another on-prem instance, whatever makes sense for your workflow.
You mentioned to use this as a backup. Can you use also as a continuous data protection when when a file is changing, you make immediately a copy?
We don't have we can do file level copies, but it's not down to like instantaneous. It's more like
not
event-based.
But for TDM, if a file is changed and you have mirror mode on, it'll make the change local and make the change remote simultaneously.
Okay.
Yeah.
In our snapshots, we're also indexing all the files so you can quickly recover the files. So if you wanted to find a particular file out of any of those snapshots, it's very easy to recover and find that file and restore. You can restore an individual file or the entire data set very quickly. And admins can restore files from a snapshot. You're restoring something for the CEO of the company and it's the sensitive information. You might not want the sysadmins to see that. They can restore that data without actually.
Snapshots are differential, space efficient, whole ball wax.
Exactly.
And
they're immutable.
Through encrypted data and all this stuff.
They're encrypted, they're immutable. If you replicate a snapshot, you can replicate the snapshot without providing the encryption key to the far side. And so essentially you can have it in a less protected zone, but nobody will be able to mount or access it until you provide the key over there, or you just bring the data back if you need to recover it. So you never have to expose the data in the less sensitive area or the far side. And you can also set different retention periods on the far side. So if you want to keep it longer, we also have WAN optimization built into our block level replication for snapshots. So you can go over high latency links and take advantage of that. And then with the file level replication, you could replicate to non-BrickStores or S3 object stores as well. These are some of those reports we talked about where built in, you can report on who has access to what data set and make sure, things like medical images aren't overexposed and things like that. Everything's correctly, been encrypted and all that stuff. There's a ton of reports in there that you can glean from. And then from a deployment options, we have the ability to do direct attached disk. We can do hybrid or all flash, or what's becoming very popular is the ability for us to sit in front of an existing enterprise storage and take some of that enterprise storage capacity and turn it into Cyberstorage and NAS and connect to that via fiber channel or iSCSI, or as a virtual appliance. And the great thing is, it's the same software. It can be deployed in any of these models. We have a subscription model for the software, so you can carve it up, the capacities however you want, and make it easy to deploy. And you could have, an instance on-prem that's a physical appliance replicating to, a virtual instance in the cloud, however works for you as well. And so we have a wide variety of use cases, and we just basically ride on the appropriate underlying hardware and storage infrastructure and can meet all these use cases. Obviously, we focus on people that are sensitive to data and regulation because we have a lot of value to bring to those people as well. And so with this convergence of the security and storage, we can deliver a lot of savings because it doesn't require you to have to take the time to get multiple vendors to work together, which can be risky and costly. We also don't require exposing a privileged account to compliance software that's going to go in after the fact and scan the data. When you do that, you open yourself up to an adversary using that privileged account to steal the data and hide within that scan. But also, because it's happening after the fact, you're using throughput and IO, and there's a latency between the time that the activity happens and you get an insight. So essentially, that latency can be exploited by the adversary and insider threats as well.
Quickly on the audit side of things, personal information, is there any scanning so that I can tell admins when we have filters for looking for like social security numbers and for eventually GDPR stuff to say what is PII and what was at risk, things that we can bring up to management to go, look, we've got a bunch of stuff that we shouldn't be holding on to.
Right. So currently we partner with other organizations that do that data introspection. We don't do that natively in our product today.
Okay.
Yep. And one thing is we love for, prospects and people to try our software. So we give everybody the ability to basically download the software and install it for 90 days for free. We'll even assist you if you want to go through the install and see how it works, but you can install it in basically less than 20 minutes, deploy it on any major hypervisor or cloud, and start using it and see how it works with your environment and with your data as well.
Oh, does this support multi-protocol shares? So can you do NFS and SMB together off of the same?
Yes, you can. We have a lot of
Okay.
national labs and science do that frequently. Yep.